Hi everybody, and welcome to this session on pathway briefings with our personal case studies. There are four of us going to speak on the different pathways. I'm Professor Rachel McLean, and I'm going to speak about the research and knowledge exchange pathway. So first of all, just to say, it's really important to me that I introduce myself as Professor Rachel McLean, because I do find it really hard in meetings sometimes to do that. So, picking up on one of the points that the Vice-Chancellor made, quite often I'll sit in meetings and I'll have, Professor Jack Smith and Professor Sebastian, whoever, and I'll say, and I'm Rachel. And, so it's really important that we all take that away as well, that, once you have achieved this, it's important that you celebrate it and you own it. So, it's important to me to introduce myself today as that. So, as I said, I'm going to talk about the research and knowledge exchange pathway. To start with, I'm going to give an overview of my career path to date, which will illustrate to you how I decided to go for this route to professorship. So I started out as a librarian in the days when some of you might be old enough as academics to remember Data Star and Dialogue. So if an academic wanted to do an internet search, a search to get literature digitally in those days, academics weren't trusted because there was a system where we had to dial up and it would cost something like £30 a minute. So academics couldn't be trusted to do that. So the librarian had to do it. And the academic would fill in a form about the literature review they wanted to do and ceremoniously hand it to the librarian. And, the librarian would take it and go away and do that search. And I really enjoyed that aspect of my work. Some of the librarians didn't want to do it because it was quite a responsibility to be. You could potentially waste all that money, £30 a minute. So, a lot of them didn't like to do it, but I enjoyed that bit. And I think in those days, the internet, it was quite new. I think only the travel industry, the sex industry, and librarians actually used the internet in those days. So, I felt quite privileged to be in there in the early days. And that helped me to decide that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to have a career as an academic, and I wanted to be involved in research. So when I had children, that gave me a moment to pause and think about my career and decide what I wanted to do, and decided that I wanted to become an academic and looked around for PhD opportunities. I managed to get a sponsorship from United Utilities, who were looking at the time into how they could use the internet with customers. So this gave me that opportunity to develop my career as an academic. So my PhD was into online business, and in those days it was looking into how retail companies and the likes of United Utilities deal with customers and interact with them through digital channels. So I think at that time there was Early Learning Centre was on there, Staples was on the internet, I think Amazon were just about starting off. So it was a really new and exciting area to research into. And I managed to get quite a few publications out of my PhD, which sort of, again, laid the foundations for a good, a career as an academic in research. And I really enjoyed that aspect of my role, as I said. So then coming to the end of my PhD, and you'll all know, I'm sure everyone here has done a PhD. It's a real challenge. You have the ups and downs. It's a roller coaster, and that's that replicates the route to professor or readership. All the things that you have to achieve, so much going on. Sometimes it's great and get lots of acceptances, and then sometimes it's downhill and you get a few rejections that knock you sideways a little bit. But it's important to just dust yourself off it and carry on. So I made a slight mistake in that I saw a job advertised at Manchester Met when I was in the write-up phase of my PhD, and I went for that and I got it. So I'm thinking, there's 6 months to write my PhD up. But of course, as a new academic with all that work to do that's all new to me, it took me slightly longer to get my PhD completed. So then I had my Viva on the 1st of April 2004, which 1st of April, I'm still waiting for someone to shout April Fool and take it away from me. But that's 2004 is quite a while ago now. So I think I've managed to escape. I've got away with it. So, that's good. So I started in the business school at Manchester Met, and that's in quite a cross-disciplinary role, because I was taking that. I did my PhD in computer science and engineering department at Salford Uni, and then I was employed in a business school. So that cross-disciplinary approach presented a few challenges, but also lots of opportunities. So you might have had it said, obviously for a pathway to a professorship through publication, you have to publish a lot. And you might have it where people say, what's your research area? And you tell them and they say, you should talk to such a body because they're researching into that. And you kind of think, well, yeah, it's important that I know about other people's research into my area, but actually it's more valuable to me to speak to someone who's doesn't know about my area. Maybe, a programmer, maybe a health academic, somebody who has a different discipline that can combine my expertise with theirs and come up with a different research topic, or we can come at it as a cross-disciplinary, in a cross-disciplinary way, which, as we know now, is very celebrated, and open funders are very much open to that pathway now. So I think that's really important, to look for people who are not doing the same research as you, rather than flocking together. Look where you can contribute from your perspective. So while I was at Manchester Met, I've realised it's important to look outside, and I got involved with some organisations, one of them being the UK, so UK Academy of Information Systems. It was an organisation that had been set up by a group of male academics, and it had always been males on the board. And I joined the board, which was a bit intimidating at the time. But eventually, after a few years, I became the first elected woman president of that organisation in 25 years. So the reason I tell you that is because that's a really good thing to do for a reader or professor. If you've got something on your CV like that, where you've engaged outside of the university, we're all really busy, I know, and you've got your day job to do and you feel overwhelmed with that, but it's really important that you get involved in your discipline outside of the university, and that you take opportunities to get known outside, because you will need external references. You need to be a recognised figure and be nationally and internationally renowned. So that's the way to do that. Make sure you get involved with organisations outside. Make sure you look out for those profile raising opportunities, and opportunities to work with other people, to network, to publish, to do bids together. And that's how you'll manage to do that, by looking outside of your own little world and your own department and our own university. Again, for career advancement, it's important to do that. Sometimes people have come to me and said, I can't see any advancement for me here. And it's sad to say this, but sometimes you do have to move to another university to get the experience you want. So possibly the research pathway is a little bit easier, because you can to get that, to combine that with your day job. But if you wanted to go into academic leadership, which I know someone else is talking about later, and you can't see the next step for you, well, maybe look at another university, go and get some experience there, and then come back to John Moores afterwards as a reader or a professor. And someone in my department did that. So I've got a reader in my school who went to Manchester Met because she wasn't getting it, and came back as a reader. So that's good advice too. What more can I tell you? So as through the traditional path, it is important to take the three main criteria: publish, pull money in, and supervise PhDs. So they're the things you need to make sure that you're doing. But you also need to be what we call a good citizen. That's something that's always looked at when people apply for PhDship. So tempting as it is to sit and publish and do your own work and make sure that you're ticking all those criteria, it's important that you get your profile out there and get known as someone in the university who gets involved in events like this, in the research conference every year, get your name known and be seen as a team player and someone who contributes to the university business every day. But having said that, it's also important that you learn when to say yes and when to say no, because we know that you can be asked to do lots of things that take your time and perhaps don't add to your CV. So you have to be a little bit selfish. So I've learned over the years to say, if somebody asks me, say, to review for a conference or review for a journal, you quite often find, yes, you'll say, yeah, okay, I'll do a review, and then you'll get 2 papers to review. And then a little bit later on, they'll say, oh, someone hasn't done a review. Can you just do another quick one for me? And before you know it, you've done 3 or 4 reviews for the same conference that perhaps doesn't benefit you in any way. So what I do now is I'll say, yes, I can do a review for you, but I can just do the one because I'm really overcommitted at the minute and I don't want to let you down. So you can politely say, yes, I want to do that because that's going to help me as well as you. But, I can only do that one. So don't be frightened to say no. Pick your things, pick the things that you choose to say yes to. How will it help you, as well as contributing back to the profession and to your discipline area and to your peers? I want to say a little bit about mentoring. I hope I'm okay for time. Mentoring, so formal mentoring, I think it is useful, and I'm happy to say that somebody I mentored this year, I hope she's I don't know if she's here or not, but I hope it's okay for me to say that Case Standing came to me and said, I might go for professorship this year, but I think I'm probably maybe leave it till next year. And when I looked at her CV, I said, no, you've got to go for it this year. You've got everything, you must go for it. And she got it. So, I've got a little bit more to say about that. There's echoing the Vice Chancellor's point later about men and women, but Kay was saying maybe next year, and she went for it this year and got it. So that formal mentoring can be good. But I often think I've picked up more advice really from informal conversations that I've had. Things in passing, maybe from line managers, maybe from other colleagues outside the university, and particularly from the men. So it might be a bit controversial to say here because it's a women's event and, obviously women are very supportive of each other generally. But I sometimes think that we could learn a lot more from the men. because that is the case, what the Vice-Chancellor said. Men will go for it when they've perhaps not hit all the criteria and think, oh, well, I'll give it a go. And women will hold back and keep on holding back. And, you need to put yourself out there. Don't be modest, recognise what you've got and go for it. So in my school, I've approached some women and said, you need to go for readership. And they'll say, maybe next year. And I said, no, go for it this year. On the other hand, I'll have men come to me who'll say, well, I'm thinking of going for reader, but actually, on second thoughts, I'll go for professor, I think. And that sort of attitude is completely different. So I think in some ways we would benefit from teaming up with men to be mentored. And so in the university at the moment, we've got a reciprocal mentoring program with Black students and senior executive. I think the directors are now involved in it. I'm involved in it. I think in some ways we could benefit from having men and women paired up as mentors, and the men could learn from us and we could learn from them, because it was things that men said to me that made me go for my professorship when I did. Somebody said to me, I think, give it 3 or 4 years and then you might be ready. And I thought, 3 or 4 years, and then I thought, that's actually not very good advice, because 3 or 4 years, I could sit and do nothing for 3 or 4 years and I wouldn't be ready. Or I could publish like a publishing machine and get lots of bids in 2 years, and then I would be ready. So it's not to do with time. It's looking at your achievements and the work, what you've got. So ask a few people, get a few people's opinions. Eventually, after I'd listened to the person who had 3 to 4 years and sat there and thought about that for a while, I got someone else's advice who said, send me a CV. No, you've got everything. You need to go for it now. And I did, and I got it first time. So I was right to go for it then. And that person who gave me that advice wasn't a formal mentor. It was an informal conversation. So, take those informal mentoring opportunities as well. I think I'm probably going to have to sort of wind up here. So I've got just some top tips on putting the application together. I think start now. So it's like your PhD. You can write and change things and get a bit more and put a bit more in, and then you'll send it in, and you might get feedback saying, a few people do get it first time, and that would be fabulous. But you might get it back saying, you need to do more of this, you need to do more of that. And you might have concentrated doing more of this, and what you needed to do was more of that. So put it in, get the feedback. If you don't get it first time, it's not the end of the world. You know what you need to do to get it for next time. And now I think the university's changed the system, so you can go for it the following year. You don't need to wait 2 years. So do that, put it in, get the feedback, find out where you need to do the work, and act upon that. So you're channeling where your energy is where you need to. Read some successful ones. I'll happily share mine if anyone wanted to read that. I'm sure the other speakers here would today, but have a look at a successful application that went in and try to sort of follow that style. Take each of the criteria. It's very clear criteria here. John Moores is excellent for this. The criteria there, take them, show how you demonstrate how you match each of those criteria. Say what you've got that hit that note. And don't be modest. It's like a job application. It is a job application. You're applying for a new role in the university. You have to show them that you're worthy of it and that you've got. So if you have to shout about it and blow your own trumpet, because that's what's needed. You have to do it there. Get a few people to read your application. So when you've done it, don't just get one person's view. Get a few people to look at it and tell you what you could strengthen, where you could make a stronger opening. What you've not really brought out so well. And as I said, start writing now so that you've got loads of time to do that. Even if you're going for it not this year, the year after, start it now and you can add to it and change things as you go along. Nuances. Yes, remember that it's your whole career that counts. So I don't know if there are people here who just relatively recently joined John Moores, but that was another bit of advice that I got, which wasn't very good. That it's what you've done at John Moores that counts. So I've been at John Moores maybe 5 or 6 years now. But I'd had a whole, load of career before that. I'd done bids and publishing and become the president of an organisation, and all that stuff did count in the end. So don't think that it's just what you've done at John Moores. It's your whole career that's reflected here. And then in the list of pointers we were given, as us to talk about nominating the references. I'm not actually sure about this, so maybe Keith or someone can help us with this. I know that you do have to put references down, so that's why I say it's important to get your name out there, get known in your discipline, so that you've got people to put down there. But I know as well that as a school director, I'm often asked to put forward people to give references for people who've applied for professor and readership, and it's got to be sort of top secret, so the person who's applied doesn't know that I've asked this reference. So I'm not entirely sure which of the ones that the applicant nominates and the ones that I nominate, how they're taken in. So maybe that's a question we can ask Keith. Final words. I think that the process for me at John Moores was very positive. As I said, I had some bad advice, but I then got the right advice and sought out and responded to that. I think the process is very fair and very smooth. Yeah, I think that's all I've got to say. So I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Great to hear your story. My apologies. I had a few IT issues at the beginning of the session, which won't be a surprise to many of you. I'm going to welcome, I think, Alison Cockgrave to talk about academic leadership. And final thing for Rachel is I do hope your plumbing issues get sorted very quickly, Rachel.
Thank you.
So, Alison, if you're ready to start, it would be great to hear from you.
Oh, brilliant. So, yeah, my name is Alison Cockgrave, and I am Professor of Built Environment Education is my title, and I was awarded that title under the criteria of academic leadership. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about this morning. And basically, I'm going to talk through my application and what I put in there to get it was successful first time around, which was brilliant. And I did prepare some slides which I can circulate to people afterwards. But the first one was entitled Plan, and basically with a question mark, because I have to be honest, I didn't have a plan. I didn't set out to apply for a professorship. I sort of fell into it, which is the common theme around my entire career. I seem to have fallen into things and very luckily ended up in some great positions. But I have to be honest, I didn't really have a plan. And I did need the impetus of, it was some male colleagues actually saying to me, do you know what, you satisfy the criteria for academic leadership for professor, and you need to apply for it. And it took me probably 3 years to get round to it and to get the confidence to sort of think, yeah, I'm going to put this in. So when I sat down and thought, yeah, I'm going to put this in, and it did take me 3 years. And I think this is a problem. I think it was Rachel sort of alluded to this as well, that there is a confidence issue with a lot of women, that you don't acknowledge and recognise that what you're doing is something quite significant, and it takes encouragement from others to actually give you the confidence to actually put these things in. So I think when I sat down and reflected and looked at the criteria, I thought, yeah, you know what, I've got examples under all those criteria that I could put into this application. And one of the key things about an application is the quality of the application. It's got to be good. I also sit on the Readers and Conferment panel, and there are some striking differences between the structures of the applications that people put in, and that there is a way to craft these applications, and therefore getting advice from other professors, other readers, or other senior staff in the university is a real, it's a real must. You need to do that, absolutely. So I structure my application with 3 main themes, and the first one, well, actually, I'll just carry out this in that for professorship, you need to show that you're doing work that's recognised nationally and internationally. So for readership, it's probably nationally, but for professor, it's internationally. So I needed to sit down and think, what is it I'm doing that gives me international recognition? And there's 3 things that I chose. At the time of writing the application, I was the chair of one of the major PSRB accreditation panels for built environment, which is the school I work in. I was the first female chair of that panel, and it accredits academic programs globally. So all around the world, we do accreditation visits. And we also write the educational frameworks for that you're required to map against for accreditation. So that was very much as a demonstration of an international impact. I've also developed a significant number of collaborative programs in many different countries, probably about 10 countries and about 30 collaborative programs. So again, that was a demonstration of international engagement. And the final one was that I've written 5 textbooks with numerous editions they're core texts at UK universities, so I could demonstrate national impact, but they've also been translated into Chinese and Arabic. So again, that put on the international slant. So those 3 things were the things that I focused on, that were definitely over and above what my current role at the time was, which was a grade 10 subject leader. So yeah, I couldn't put in things that I would be expected to do as a subject leader, because I needed to demonstrate over and above that role in order to satisfy the criteria for professorship. So I picked on those three things and I emphasised those a lot in the application. And what that stopped me doing was sort of waffling about things that A, were part of the role of a subject leader anyway, and B, didn't give me, didn't show that sort of national and international recognition. Very important things I was doing in the university and I was doing externally, but not necessarily important for a professorship application. And I think that's one of the skills of picking a few themes, is that it does focus your mind. And you know, I never really thought too much about these things until I looked at the criteria for a professorship and realised actually this could be the basis of an application. I then had to look about how these things and how maybe other things that I was doing map against the university strategy, because it's really important that in your application letter you do address the main themes of the university strategy and demonstrate that either these three themes or other things were contributing to that strategy. So with regard to excellence in learning, teaching and assessment, I at the time I was Associate Dean Education, and the faculty scores for NSS went up by 10% over the duration of the time that I was in that role. So I use that as an example. But I'd also won 4 externally funded learning and teaching and assessment projects, funded by 4 different bodies, working in conjunction with other universities in the UK, and one working with a partner in Ghana that was funded by the council. So again, that they fit in against that theme, but also bring in that national and international slant to the application. With regard to establishing and enhancing the student partnership, I was fortunate to be asked to undertake the role of the business lead for the development of the learner engagement software, which we're using within the university. So that was sort of a university-wide initiative. Plus, I also established a number of summer school opportunities for our students to go abroad for summer programs to 4 different countries, and for those students from those countries to come to us for a summer school. So again, that's the international aspect. With social and economic engagement, the big focus was on collaborative program development. And then embedding research and scholarship, well, I had undertaken and been the lead academic for 3 KTPs, and also developed the research-informed strategy, teaching strategy for the school. So that's just some ideas about the sort of things that you can put against those strands of the strategy to demonstrate how you're actually contributing to the strategy with the role that you're doing, but maybe going over and above what you would normally expect to do in your role. At the time, you had to have the underpinning research to support the application. So at the time of application, I had 14 peer-reviewed journals, 11 conference papers. I had 5 book chapters published, and I also had the books, which I've already mentioned. So they're not under the research and scholarship requirements. That's not a huge amount, but it was deemed to be enough applying under the academic leadership criteria. I've got a lot more than that now, because actually the given me a lot more confidence in publishing the outputs of the work that I've been doing. So that was over maybe about 10 years. And in the last 4 years, I probably published the same number again. So it did this appointment did give me confidence to publish an awful lot more. And I suppose that it's hard to put. This is one of the problems with professor and readership applications, is that there's no fixed number. So you don't say, well, you need to get 20 papers and then it'll be okay, because that's not the case. Because the panel will also look at the quality of the outputs. So they'll look at the quality of the journal that you publish in, and they'll look at whether that there's a theme within your application. So you're not just writing randomly, that there's a developing theme with the papers and the conference papers that you're writing. So I think that was important. With regard to bids and finances coming in, I included the amounts of funding from collaborative partner development and also from the educational projects incomes, and it came to around about £500,000 at the time. But that's quite a high amount. But again, some of the research applications that go in, that would be either quite low or very high. So you know, again, there's no hard and fast rules. And I did also have 3 completed PhD students as first supervisor, 2 as non-director studies, and I was ongoing with with current PhD supervisions. So I did have outputs, research outputs that underpinned this application, but that wasn't the main part of the application. As a recap, the 3 things that I applied under were the professional body engagement, the writing of the textbooks, and also the number of collaborative programs that were developed. They were the key themes of the application under academic leadership. If I'd applied under research and scholarship, I would have been unsuccessful because I don't think these outputs would have been good enough. But supporting the application under academic leadership with all of those other activities, I had a successful, the panel very favourably looked at my application very favourably, and I was awarded the professorship. So you know, very, very positive. So I think some underpinning research against your application under academic leadership is important, because the term professor does implicate there's some research activity going on, but that research can take many different forms. I think that the thing to emphasise as well in your applications is the national and international esteem. And again, that comes in many different guises. I went through my application, my professorship application the other day to think about what to say this morning. And I looked at things that I put in this, both the CV and in the letter that give evidence of this esteem. And things like external examinerships. You know, I've been an external examiner for the last 15 years at numerous universities, both in the UK and overseas. So again, we've got, you know, to be invited to be an external examiner is esteem, and loads of staff at JMU are external examiners. And I don't think they really think that to be invited to be an external examiner is actually a real measure of esteem, because somebody's looked you up and somebody's taken the time to ring you up and say, do you want to do this? So the external examinerships, I did mention only a sentence or so, but it was in there. Obviously, invited guest speakers where I've been invited to talk at conferences, both nationally and internationally. Things like I've been on a lot of validation panels for other universities for overseas collaborative programs. And again, you know, I emphasize that as a measure of esteem, because they obviously felt that I was able to do this. And that's why I was invited to take part in that activity. Things like being an academic journal and a conference paper reviewer, they again, you know, you're invited to do those. If you do a good job, you continue doing it. And I'm currently doing that for about 6 different journals and 2 conferences on an annual basis. And little things, which this is an interesting one, because things that you don't think about, and this is something that somebody pointed out to me that I'd mentioned to them and I'd just forgotten all about. But I was invited by Pearson, who obviously they validate all the HNC and H&D qualifications, which are global. You know, people in all sorts of countries around the world are delivering Pearson programs. And I was invited as the sole reviewer by Pearson to review all the built environment higher qualifications. And so I actually designed and refined the curricula, which colleges all over the world will be using. And I'd just forgotten all about that. And then somebody said to me, do you remember where you got asked to do that? By Pearson. That was brilliant. Do you remember you were really pleased about it? And I said, yeah, that's brilliant. You know, to be invited, all the built environment academics in the UK, you were asked to do that. And those are the sort of things that I just never had thought about or just forgotten about. And obviously put that in the application. And when I reread it, I thought, this sounds great. And then when I got my application reviewed by people within JMU, that was one of the things that people said, you need to make more of this. You know, this is a really big thing. This is a real measure of esteem that's got international and national impact. And so therefore I did make much more of that. So I think you've really got to sort of like have your own personal brainstorm about the things that you've done over time, and then look at those against the criteria for reader professorship. And then make the most of those things and not focus on the things that you would ordinarily just do doing your job as part of the day job. And I think that's what lets a lot of applications down where, you know, people say, oh, I'm doing this, and you think, well, actually, you're a program leader. You should be doing that. That's not over and above what you should be doing. And I think you need to have that sort of little, as I say, an internal little brainstorm before you even start thinking about the application. So just to finish off, you know, my key messages are this thing about putting in your justification, in your justification for your application, things that you do over and above what your current job or role or grade requires. And I will say that I have reviewed a lot of applications in the faculty, because I'm on the faculty panel before they go to the university panel, where a lot of people, mainly male colleagues, do put a lot about what's expected of them in their sort of day job. And then we get a lot of females where they put their applications in, and I go back to them and say, you've missed this out. Why didn't you put that in? You know, you've done that. And they say, well, I didn't think about that. So I think in order to address that, you really have to start your application early, because you need to get it reviewed and reviewed and reviewed as many times as possible by people that know you, so they know what you've done, so they can jog your memory if you miss something out that could be really, really important. But also from the wider university, for people who are experienced at judging these applications and have written applications themselves or on the conferment panel, to make sure that it's written in a way that it gets all the points across, and it emphasises what are the really important bits. Because as I say, just to finish off, that bit about the Pearson reviewing thing, that was just one sentence. And then, well, it required somebody to remind me to put it in. Then I put it in, and it was only like one sentence. And then the internal reviewer said, you need to make a lot more of this. So you need a good few months to put these applications together, and keep revisiting them, leaving time for people to review them and make comments, make changes, go back out again, until you get to a point where people say, you know, this is good to go. So thank you for listening to me. I hope you found that useful. I'm obviously available for any questions in the question session.
Alison, that was fabulous as always great to listen to you. Thank you for your comments and your insights. We're obviously rushing with time, so I'm going to pass on straight to Professor Claire Milsom, who's going to talk to us about teaching and learning pathway that she went through. So very much welcome, Claire. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm obviously talking about the teaching and learning route, but in all honesty, my career has really been a game of two halves, and entirely at Liverpool John Moores University. So I just want to describe how you can kind of, you know, we're not all as directional as perhaps we want to be, and I think that's come through the other presentations. Things happen by accident, and I'm definitely an accidental professor. So I started my career as a paleontologist. I have a PhD in paleontology. So I started out as a, you know, child fossil collector, and came into higher education. And what I want to sort of talk about here is how the advantage of the statement is you can bring all aspects of your career together. So I was a very early paleontologist, PhD in paleontology, and I spent a number of years. I came straight to Liverpool John Moores. Well, I came to Liverpool Polytechnic in 1991, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. But I came as a new blood lecturer, and the thing about that was we were brought in because we were researchers, but the amount of teaching was just astronomical. I remember being really sort of shocked because I'd only been in kind of like Russell Group universities where it had been quite minimal. And I came to Liverpool Polytechnic, and I was literally teaching 9 to 5 on the old Clarence Street, down on Byram Street. And that was quite, in a way, it was probably the best staff development or career development I could have had, because I instantly saw like that how important it was to be able to present your discipline to students in a way that they could understand. So it meant that you had to know your discipline in a particular way. And the problem with paleontology is it's a very uninclusive, inaccessible science that basically was predicated on knowing loads of different types of fossils. So very early on in my career, I wanted to write a textbook on paleontology that would be far more accessible so that I could teach paleontology more effectively. And I think that's probably how sort of the formation of my professorship was, as being a researcher, a paleontologist researcher, an active researcher, but wanting to be able to communicate that more effectively to my students. And I was teaching 9 to 5, so I really wanted to get that right. It would have been a hard job without having some sort of support material. So if I go on to the next slide. So I continued probably for 20 years in the Faculty of Science as a researcher teaching paleontology. And I just want to put this slide in because my most cited paper is a paper where I got something wrong. And other sort of forums is that, and it's a bit what other people have been saying, is everything in your application. So I have a highly cited paper, which is basically a paper where I put a particular morphology, which has been contested, but it means that I sort of persistently refer to this paper, and it's kind of like an anchor. And again, that was sort of in my application, the fact that you sort of build a scientific knowledge and discipline through mistakes as well as through successes. So if you have applications that have been unsuccessful but have led to particular methodologies, or have caused you to reflect on your subject in a different way, they are all very important. So it is a list of achievements, obviously it is, and it is about esteem, but the application itself gives you the qualitative space to describe the pathway that got you to where you are. So I always put this one paper within my application. And I had, we've talked about research grants, I had a number of paleontology research grants. I worked for the National Geographic and had a very strong paleo portfolio, but never sufficient to be a professor, to be a scientific professor, I would say. But it was a strong enough portfolio that allowed me to publish. My number of paleontology publications, probably only about 20 to 30, compared with a stronger teaching and learning pedagogic output. So that was the first half of my application, and I talked very much about how I moved from paleontology to pedagogy and how teaching paleontology informed my academic practice. And it was evidenced through a textbook which, like Alison has described, was translated and was used quite extensively within institutions and schools. But I had come to Liverpool John Moores University. I love this slide because it's the day that we became a university and I carried the mace. And it was really important because I felt like I was at a time in higher education where we were providing that proper widening access and accessibility to higher education. And I had a very strong commitment through teaching paleontology to academic practice. But the landscape had changed, really transformed at that time. And it moved again into, sorry, I keep moving the wrong slide. It moved again in 2010. And this is the other half of my application. So in 2010, I moved to the centre to be head of teaching and learning. And my move to the centre was predicated on a paleontology career and a number of textbooks and developments in the field of paleontology. But in 2010, we saw the Brown Review and we saw increasingly about how higher education was going to be less and less about a truth and judgment and more about consumer rights. And there was a narrative around marketization. And I got really interested in the data. And as a paleontologist, I'd been a quantitative paleontologist. And I have a strong data background. And the thing about paleontology is it's a lot about inference. There's a lot of guess. And when I looked at the higher education data, you could kind of use similar methodologies to make, in terms of outcomes in science. I'm conscious now I've only got 2 minutes. Will it just go off in 2 minutes? No, it's only shaking their head. So I moved my research. So I basically moved my research to look at what was happening within the higher education field on teaching quality and how we assess teaching quality. But I used almost the same scientific methodology and discipline that I'd used for paleontology. And I started to research around qualitative and quantitative data. And probably, like the textbook in paleontology, probably the second most important publication within my application was the work we did around the sophomore slump. So we had a large grant from the Higher Education Academy, which supported work into qualitative data and looking at why students underperform in higher education in their second year. So in terms of my application, they were probably kind of like the two pillars, two pieces of significant work that I could build my narrative around. And I think that's really useful to look at. What are the significant achievements in your career? What brought you to that point? And what are the associated publications around that? And in terms of the sophomore slump work, that had caused me to develop a national and an international reputation in higher education. So we'd looked at qualitative analysis, we'd looked at the student voice in surveys, as well as looking at the quantitative data. And so I think what I hope I've sort of shown there, probably in quite a rushed way, is that I took my paleontology research, my paleontology career, and a very high teaching load and a commitment to the students. And I sort of mapped that through my career into higher education and how I used very similar methodologies to be an active researcher in higher education and build a national and international program. And in that sense, I was using the networks around higher education. And I think it's really important that you position yourself within networks. So as a paleontologist, I was really active in Paleontological Society and was an editor and so on. And then in higher education, again, I'm very active within the networks, within the European Association for International Research, institutional research. I'm an editor. Every year we produce a volume. We have we didn't obviously have one this year. We have a national conference. And I've kept myself networked within the sort of quantitative institutional data side of higher education. I mean, I appreciate this is really rushed, but the final thing I want to say is twice in my PTPR, I was asked if I would apply for professorship. And the first, my boss was a woman. And this is the truth. So she said, Claire, I really think you've got the profile. You should apply to be a professor. And I said, thank you very much, but I haven't. And she said, oh, all right then. And I didn't. And then 2 years later, I had a male boss who said, I really think you should apply for a professorship, Claire. And I said, again, I'm sorry, I don't think I've really got the profile. And he said, let the panel be the judge of that. So I think there is something about gender in this. And I think we've heard this from a number of people, that women are less likely to think that they meet the criteria. And I think it is about looking at what you've done, what you can evidence what you've done, even if it spans across a different sort of career trajectory, which it will do inevitably. And then you bring that together in an evidence way. I think it's about being strong, being true to what your commitments were and what your disciplines were, and recognizing how you got to the position through evidence. It's still, for the teaching and learning criteria, there's less about PhD. I had the PhD student, but I don't have a strong PhD student record. What I have are publications, evidence that I've influenced practice at a national and international level, and I have research funding around teaching and learning. So that's all. I'm so conscious of time. That's all I really wanted to say. But I'm happy to answer any questions on it.
Thank you, Claire. Again, a fantastic insight to a career that began at Liverpool Polytechnic.
Yeah.
So I'm an ex-Liverpool Polytechnic graduate, so I know what it was like back in the day. I am mindful of time, so I'm going to simply invite Dr. Hannah Timpson to come on and talk about social and economic engagement before we then have a quick break before questions. So Hannah, as soon as you're ready, please go ahead.
Thanks, Keith. Hopefully you can see and hear me okay. So yeah, conscious of time, I'll try and keep this brief, and then there is the opportunity for Q&A after. So anything that I don't cover that you've got questions on, I can pick up here. I'm a reader in socio-economic engagement and health, and I was awarded this back in 2018. So I went down the social and economic engagement route. Just a bit of brief information about my background. So my research interests are around community engagement and health inequalities, and I do a lot of work with third sector organisations who provide support to people in communities who have got often multiple complex needs that affect their health and wellbeing outcomes, and who might not necessarily access health and social care or statutory services. These third sector organisations that I work with are often very poorly funded, and they struggle to demonstrate the impact of their work, which is often resource intensive and very heavily relied upon by the statutory sector. They're often also funded on very short-term contracts, which then has implications for the sustainability of their service and the support that they can offer to communities. So my research involves working with these organisations to help them to support the evidence about the work that they do, the outcomes and the impact of their support. I go into communities to understand the difference that their work makes, and then engage with the commissioners of these services and statutory organisations to help them to evidence the need for more secure, longer term funding. And I sort of developed a specialism around social value, helping organisations to report outcomes in quantitative ways, which are often the ways in which the commissioners want to see those outcomes reported, but also developing tools to help them to support the softer, or harder to measure outcomes as well. So I developed an interest around social value, social return on investment, and I've been doing this for over a decade now. And quite a common theme that seems to have sort of been shared is this view that I didn't really realise that what I was doing would be applicable for a readership, and it was my line manager at the time, back in 2016, 2017, Jim McVeigh, who said, you know, your work really fits in with this area, and really supported me to go down that route. So for me, the role of my mentor was really crucial in this. So I had a really fantastic mentor that I engaged with. I was really grateful to have the support of Zoe, who really helped me to identify the areas of my work that I needed to demonstrate in order to evidence that what I was doing was social and economic engagement. Having somebody external to the department was really useful for me to give me that objective viewpoint. And what I did and what I worked with Zoe was went through the application, the conferment criteria, looked at what I was doing already, looked at what I could evidence, and then looked at where there were gaps so that I could make sure that I was gathering evidence to then inform that. And that was so useful. And again, another common thread throughout is don't be modest. And Zoe was just really critical in helping me to really flag up what I had done and where I had led things and where I had used my initiative and worked independently. So mentorship is definitely something that I would recommend. Also support from others as well. So find your people. It doesn't have to be formal mentorship. If you can find people across the university who are working in a similar area or looking to share their experiences, that for me has always been really helpful. And there's loads of offers that I've already seen in the discussion forum of people offering to share their applications and their experiences. So definitely use that. For the social and economic engagement criteria, my tips around this would be to not only evidence the activity that you do that you feel is applicable to social and economic activity, but also to evidence the impact and the outcomes of this work. So how do you know that the contribution that you're making is having an impact on economic and or cultural and or social well-being, for example, and consider the immediate and the wider beneficiaries of this. So, for example, in terms of social and economic engagement, one of the key things to consider is not only the impact that your work has for the direct people that you're working with, but what are the wider implications of that work? So for me, for example, working with communities, working with these third sector organisations, there were direct implications for them, but I was also able to explore and evidence the fact that that was then having an overall impact on the wider system and supporting sustainability and economic growth through the works that they were doing. Also consider your trajectory and include that within your application. So include how you propose to build on what you have already done, how that will benefit the university, and how it relates to the strategic plan. So again, where you can, reference the LJMU strategic plan and how your work complements those initiatives, and then also consider that from the perspective of the stakeholders and the topics in which you are working. One of the key things that I found really important when developing my application was thinking about how the work that I do influences policy and practice. And obviously, from an academic perspective, it's really important to think about that and to think about the academic implications of the work in terms of contribution to knowledge and research. But more importantly for me, it was around being able to demonstrate how my work influences policy and practice in terms of shaping communities. And that's something that Phil mentioned earlier. So if you are already doing this, be clear about what you're doing, how you're doing it, who are the key networks that you're engaging in, how are you influencing policy and practice on a regional, national, international agenda. And if you're not, who are the key networks that you need to engage with in order to make sure that you can progress the engagement element of your work. So I think that for me is really important. And thinking about committee membership and leadership roles, what can you put yourself forward for that will be beneficial for yourself, for your work, for your team, for the university, and for the communities in which you're working. And then I think just to finally finish up, a couple of tips for me were to I was given some really good advice around being able to demonstrate that what you do, how does it go over and above what is expected of you within your job description? So what are you doing that's independent? What are you doing that is innovative? And often you don't realise that you're doing it because we do tend to be very modest. We don't tend to look at ourselves in that way. So think about how you can demonstrate that. It's really important. And then just a final word on external review, and I know this was mentioned briefly by, I think it was Rachel. For me, in terms of the referees that I provided to give that external review of my work, I felt that it was really important to have a balance of academics and also people with lived experience. So for my reviewers, I provided people who were working within the sector in an academic perspective, so professors who could comment on the quality of my work from a social value, community engagement perspective. But I also felt that it was really important to ask for the voices of those people who could say, yes, Hannah's work has made a difference to us and this is how. So I felt like that was quite a key point to mention here. And finally, I just wanted to mention, as part of my kind of wider remit, I'm the academic lead for the Researcher Development Concordat. So I have a real key interest in supporting staff development across the university. And I think that where we can look at how we can demonstrate our role and how we support others within the university. And again, I think it's something which is really beneficial in terms of our trajectory. How are we contributing to the agenda within and beyond LJMU? So I'll finish there, but then obviously if there's any other questions that you have, then I can pick up on those later.
Hannah, that was again fantastic, and thank you for getting through that as quickly as you possibly could. I'm glad you mentioned the Concordat, because if you didn't, I was going to. But it's an important part of what we'll do moving forward to support all of our research and engaged staff. We've come to the end of this session. I'd like to quickly ask the 4 presenters if they can go straight into the next session, because we're going to do a little bit of prep work. And I'll just say to all of the audience, we will obviously have that session going live from 11:40, but we won't actually start the session until 11:45. So people have got chance for a quick cup of tea, or just a stand up and move, which I think is quite important, and or go into the networking or discussion board sessions. The final thing for me to say is that we asked all 4 of our presenters to do this today, and every single one of them said yes instantaneously. So their enthusiasm for doing this and supporting our staff, it should be recognised. So my thanks. Forward to seeing questions come up in the session but we'll start at 11:45 with Tina. Thank you, everybody.